very excited today that we have presenters from the Florida Native Plant Society. They've been a longstanding partner with the Florida Invasive Species Partnership, but historically, there's been ebbs and flows in our engagement. So I'm excited to be kind of ramping back up that engagement with this group that does such important work across the state and is so well connected. So we're going to hear about some of their conservation programs and how they partner with different folks, from both Valerie Anderson, who is the Director of Communications and Programming for FNPS, as well as Lilly Anderson-Messec, the Director of North Florida Programs and the coordinator of the Dicerandra Keepers Project. And if you don't follow Lilly on Instagram, I'm going to do a little plug for her account, because if you're interested in native plants, she's at Lilium, like the genus of lily and bird, BYRD, on Instagram. It's an incredible wealth of knowledge on invasive plants, or I'm sorry, native plants, especially over in the Panhandle area that she works in. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and kick it over to them.
Hey, thank you for the great introduction. So obviously I'm Valerie, and then there's Lilly, my coworker. I'm in Orlando and Lily's in Tallahassee. As a basic intro, I was hired in September 2018. FNPS has been sort of growing as of late, and so there was like a strategic plan. They decided to hire people. And so I was the second hire and Lilly is the third. And now we're both full time.
Yeah, I joined in late 2019 and have been working up here. I'm the only Panhandle employee. It's just me and Valerie right now. And then we have an interim ED because Juliette Rainier recently retired to Vermont, or moved and left FNPS. We miss her very much. Yeah. But we are currently looking for a new ED if anybody wants to apply.
Yeah, so it's not currently open, but keep an eye out for the job posting because it should be posting pretty soon. Yeah, so we'd love to have a great boss, guys. Okay, so our mission is to conserve, preserve, and restore the native plants and native plant communities of Florida. And if this makes you think that maybe we have a little mission creep, yeah, we do a lot of different things. And but we do try and focus on preservation, conservation, and restoration. So in the right-hand side, that's at our Little Italy restoration area, St. Johns River Water Management District. And we were taking rescued plants there. Okay, so one of our main policy projects that we do is partnering with other organizations on advocating for defending and fully funding Florida Forever. We do action alerts. We work with the Ocklawaha, the Forest Coalition, to save the Ocklawaha River. Local issues such as like charter amendments, like the ballot initiative in Volusia County to refund Volusia ECHO program. And our local chapters also help drive our policy positions. We have taken an interest in this plant called Waria and Plexifolia, which is near Ocklawaha. We'll talk about that more. And we've actually purchased land there for the first time. So we are now actually landowners. We also work on managing and restoring rare plants on protected lands. So we have the Dicerandra project, which is an endemic mint. And we had Duke grant, we don't have that grant anymore, and Florida Forest Service grants to both monitor and restore these impacted sites. And then Lilly basically runs the Dicerandra Keepers Project, which is a Florida Forest Service grant. And so our focus is on populations in natural areas that are being overlooked by Florida Forever or not as well looked at by land managers, since there's a lot of agencies that don't really have a ton of botanists on staff. Okay, so particularly in the case of our Dicerandra, we're really concerned about localized populations extinctions. So for example, Dicerandra modesta is only in this one particular place. I mean, it's the only protected area and it's the only population that we know of. And so that even if it's not the only population for these other species, there's still a risk of species extinction for narrow-range endemics. And also when things get turned into housing subdivisions, or when the seed bank goes away, that there's a major loss of genetic diversity within the species. And then of course, we don't want to see these natural communities being lost either. Okay, so the Warea area has kind of ramped down a little bit since we did get the 12.5 acres, but we are managing that property and encouraging the Warea on it. So Warea is in the mustard family, Brassicaceae family, and it's really beautiful. It's sort of it's a sandhill, a dry sandhill plant, and it occurs in places where there's other listed species like sand skinks. Quite pretty. And we have that proposed purchase, and we did actually make that purchase. And then that willing landowner for management is one of a really nice landowner that has a bunch of Warea on their property. We work with them. And then so this is an example of a longstanding partnership. We have the Putnam Land Conservancy. So they're a really cool land trust that is expert in this like watching deeds and tax sales. And so they get these properties just for, you know, $500, $1,000, $2,000, or sometimes they get them donated by these people who don't pay their taxes on the land. And this is kind of like a failed subdivision, although with the real estate boom coming back, there is some building back there, and it's a bit disturbing. But when we started this project, it definitely looked a lot more like a failed subdivision. And so at least in the past, there were more people who were willing to just give up their property because they didn't want to pay the taxes. And that has been a really incredible partnership. Okay, so why are we focusing on these sort of smaller parcels? Well, here's the Florida Ecological Greenways Network, which you may be hearing more about because of the Florida Wildlife Corridor bill. And there's nothing wrong with the Florida Wildlife Corridor, but I'm starting to get a little worried that it's going to replace Florida Forever. So Florida Forever actually has not just this one layer in the Critical Lands and Waters Identification Project, but a number of different layers, including aquifer recharge, biodiversity. And so Florida Forever was already, a lot of the purchases were prioritizing like large tracts of land, rather like big, wild, and connected. I think that's my next slide. Oh, not yet. There. Florida's conservation blueprint is big, wild, and connected, but big, wild, and connected does not necessarily preserve critical plant diversity, rare plants in small tracts, and already fragmented landscapes. For example, the species sandhill spiny pod, which is state endangered. So you can see these, you know, these large and connected tracts are not necessarily corresponding with biodiversity hotspots, endemic species, and high species richness. Oops, sorry for the formatting on that one. Anyway, so here's showing why it's called clasping Warea, why the common name is clasping Warea, because the leaves come around the stem clasping way. So now we have about 35 acres protected out of the 400 target acres. Okay, so we got Dicerandra, trade keepers, which we'll talk about more. Population and habitat monitoring, we do both at the state level and with our chapters. Our Land Management Partners program is a program that we have run by a chair, Grace Howell, our Land Management Partners chair, and we organize people who are good at habitat assessments and identifying plants in their particular region, and preferably have a familiarity with their local conservation areas to go on land management reviews for reassessing management plans for state parks and state forests. We also run conservation grants as well as research grants, but I didn't talk about that here. And we do seed collection, population introductions, and plant rescues. Now, most of our plant rescues are occurring in the Central Florida area. I mean, you know, FNPS started in Central Florida. So, you know, we have a number of older restoration sites like Bill Frederick in Orlando. We have the Castle Hill Rescue Site out on 50 in Claremont. And we have the Little Italy site. So and Oakland Nature Preserve. So we have partnered successfully with all those different organizations, and we did get a nice grant from the Brown Family Foundation recently to support those efforts. So, you know, these narrow endemics are really pretty, in my opinion. Okay, so here's Horseshoe Creek Scrub, or Horse Creek Scrub, depending on who you ask. That's in Lake Marion Creek Wildlife Management Area. And this is the only population of Dicerandra modesta left. So with our Florida Forest Service grant and working with the University of Florida School of Geomatics, Fisheries, whatever they rename that to do the monitoring and data analysis for it's called demographic research. So, I mean, we are crouched down counting stems and flowers, and it is really not very fun. But anyways, we're getting a lot of information about the species that we didn't have before. And there is our former executive director, Juliette Rainier, with some Dicerandra in front of her. And then the other species is Dicerandra cornutisma. And if you're really interested in this, you might I had Andre Naranjo. He is like the foremost researcher on Dicerandra. And he did a whole look at the taxonomy of Dicerandra, and he does climate modeling for risks to these species. And both of these species are at severe risk for climate change, due to climate change. So Dicerandra cornutisma, long-spurred balm. If you look, that's why it's called long-spurred balm. It's got the spurs there. Anyway, so this is on the Marjorie Harris Carr Cross Florida Greenway in the Ross Prairie section of that. And here we are doing the very painstaking monitoring work with the little pin flags. And that's a UF grad student. And this is another one of our target species for rescues, sandhill tiptoes. And now it's time for Florida Torreya. Take it away, Lily.
Yeah. And I do want to mention that if anybody is interested in seeing those Dicerandra properties, we're going to be hosting some work days for invasive species removal on those properties in March. And we're going to send that info to Emily, and she'll add it to her regular email. So if anybody wants to join, we could use your help. So here we are at Torreya taxifolia. This is a rare, it's one of the rarest conifers in the world. It's federally endangered. It's pretty much endemic to Florida with just one small population just above the Florida-Georgia line in Georgia. Can you progress? And one more. And so this is a collaborative project. It was originally started by, I'm Magnolia chapter up here in the Panhandle, and it was originally started by Magnolia chapter members who are landowners in the very narrow native range of Torreya taxifolia. It pretty much only occurs in the steephead ravines on the eastern side of the Apalachicola River. And so we had some landowners in that region who had trees on their property, and they became interested in surveying the privately owned properties within that very narrow native range, because we know where all of the publicly owned, we know where all of the trees are on publicly owned properties, but we didn't know how many occurred on privately owned properties. And so the Magnolia chapter started this project, and then state FNPS took it over in 2019, and we began working with federal grants from U.S. Fish and Wildlife, as well as the Florida Forest Service. And then we work really closely with the Atlanta Botanical Garden on this project. So we work with them on other projects as well, but we work with them super close on Torreya, because they actually have a conservation nursery where they are growing out cuttings that we collect from privately owned properties. And they are also doing the genetic work on the DNA samples that I'm collecting down here as well. And my co-worker on this project is Ashlyn Smith. She works for the Atlanta Botanical Garden, but she's located here in the Panhandle, and she does a lot of different rare plant projects in the Panhandle. And she and I, there she is right there in the top right-hand corner with a little Torreya. You can progress. So Torreya, if you aren't familiar, was once a common component of the steephead ravines within that kind of narrow native range on the eastern side of the Apalachicola River. But around 1938, leaf loss began to be observed on the trees. And by 1958, the trees were beginning to die. And then by 62, all of the mature trees were dead. And they were resprouting from the base, but there were no more like mature trees left. And so that is an exceptionally quick decline, which speaks to most likely an introduced pathogen. But nobody was sure exactly what was causing it. And the cause for its decline was very hotly debated for many decades. In 1984, it was listed as endangered. And in 86, the recovery plan was written for it. And ABG, the Atlanta Botanical Garden, began their conservation efforts on the species in 1989. So they've been working on Torreya for a very long time. And it wasn't until 2011, which is very recent, that we actually pinpointed what was causing the decline. And the University of Florida Forest Pathology Lab, Dr. Jason Smith, who heads that lab, he identified a Fusarium species that was previously completely unknown to science, and he named it Fusarium torreyae. And he's been doing work on that Fusarium species since then, but we have figured out that that's what's actually causing the decline. And it is suspected that that Fusarium was introduced to the US, most likely from China, through probably the horticultural industry. It probably came on a plant. There were some historic nurseries in the early 1900s in that region. There still are nurseries. And that's probably how it got there. And it spread to Torreya. And most worryingly, the Fusarium has been proven to spread to other genera. So other conifers like pine and hemlock can be infected by this Fusarium and can be killed by this Fusarium, but it can also even infect and kill unrelated hardwood species, such as, sorry, my text message is coming in, but such as like sweet gum and some maples. They can also be infected and carry and spread this Fusarium. So in 2018, the Torreya Keepers was formed originally. And then right after they were formed, Hurricane Michael hit, which drastically altered the ravine habitats that this already imperiled tree was occurring in. And that we originally, in 2019, we surveyed the known populations on the state lands, and we figured out there was about 20% mortality of the Torreya on state lands. And unfortunately, what we're seeing now as we are continuing to do monitoring on the public lands is that some trees are still dying, likely from the stress caused by the hurricane. And then I'll mention, in 2019, we only knew of about 700 trees remaining. So there were not a lot of individuals remaining, and they're still dying from the stress. It's considered functionally extinct because the life cycle of this pathogen is, a tree can be infected and you can't see any outward signs of infection until some sort of stress causes the Fusarium to kind of get a leg up, and it begins to show signs of cankers and leaf spot on the needles. And then the tree usually will die back to the ground. And then if it's lucky, will re-sprout again and start that whole process again. But they typically, not many of them reach sexual maturity without becoming stressed at some point and then having the Fusarium knock them back. It's a very similar process to the American chestnut blight, which some of you may be familiar with. So it's a really serious issue, and especially serious since this Fusarium is infectious to other genera. And so it's therefore really important to not plant Torreya taxifolia outside of its narrow native range, because it can infect other trees. And especially in the Northeast with hemlocks and pines, we don't want, the hemlocks are already, so stressed and imperiled by the woolly adelgids. So it's important to remember not to plant Torreya taxifolia for that reason. You can progress the slides. Here's a photo of a canker on the trunk of a Torreya. And you can see in the top right, you see some of those yellowing of the needles, those kind of spots, those whitish spots with the kind of brownish outlines are some of the leaf spot. And again, it's important to not plant the trea outside of its narrow native range for that reason. You can progress the slide. And so what we are doing is surveying and monitoring the known populations. There are yearly monitoring of specific trees on the publicly owned lands. We also are doing seed trials where, because if trea are grown in cultivation, it's much easier to maintain their health so that the fusarium doesn't kill them back before they reach sexual maturity. And Trea Toxifolia is actually the most represented species in ex situ collections in the Southeast, all because Atlanta Botanical Garden has a conservation nursery with over 500 genetically individual, genetically unique individuals that they are growing and they're able to collect seed from. And so then we're doing seed trials in its native range and checking those seed trials every year. But as you can see, the area has become very difficult to survey because Hurricane Michael really destroyed the canopy. And not only has there been a huge, loss of the canopy, but a lot of those upturned root balls have caused soil disturbance, and then the loss of the mature trees holding that soil up on these high bluffs. It's caused a lot of erosion into the ravines, which causes further issues with the trea. And then all that exposed soil, makes an opportunity for all of these secondary, all the secondary growth of blackberries and muscadine vines and, all kinds of dog fennel, et cetera. It becomes very dense and thickety because of this disturbance and this open canopy. And so surveying for the trees has become very difficult. You can progress. Where are the photos? Oh, they're there. Okay, so here are just a few photos. Like these, we were checking on known populations where we had the exact location of the individuals. And yet, the photo on the left, if you were trying to look for the tree, it would be very difficult to see, but you can just hardly see in the center there. I zoomed in a little bit and you can see some of those needles. And then we had to completely uncover the tree. So a lot of these trees are actually being covered by this secondary growth caused by the disturbance of Hurricane Michael. And so it's what we have been doing mostly is surveying now on privately owned lands. And so I spend a lot of time on the property appraiser's website, figuring out who owns what lands. And then I try to contact them, get permission, get the correct permits to collect cuttings and DNA from the property. And we survey those properties. And it has been very useful information because we have found over 160 trees just between 2020 and 2021. And that's not including what I found this current season. So just last year, we found 160 trees. That adds a lot to the, previously just around 700 trees were known. So it's really important, especially since these trees are still continuing to die from the stress of Hurricane Michael, which is just adds to the fusarium issue. So we're continuing to lose them. So as much genetic diversity as we can collect to have represented in ex situ collections, the more likely we'll be able to reintroduce the tree once we are able to treat the fusarium. And there's a lot of hope for the treatment of the fusarium because fusariums have been very well studied because of agricultural issues with fusarium. And so ABG is actually doing fungicide trials on the fusarium right now to see which fungicides might work best. And the UF Lab of Forest Pathology is continuing to do research on how the fusarium functions, because apparently each fusarium has different methods and modes of functioning in order to, cause cellular death. And we need to figure out exactly how this one functions because it was previously unknown to science. It's totally new to science. And they also, UF did genetic work on the Fusarium and found that it is in a basal clade, a very old, evolutionarily old Fusarium species, that it's only two close relatives within that clade are endemic to China. So again, that speaks to the idea that this was likely an introduced pathogen, most likely from China, and probably through the horticultural industry. And so there's Ashland there on the right. We survey and we collect DNA from every single tree, and we collect these little cuttings from some trees. And the cuttings are then sent to the conservation nursery at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, and those are grown and kept alive. And so that even if some of these trees that we've collected from die in their native, setting, we still have their genetics preserved and we'll be able to reintroduce those genes ideally. So there are a lot of different things that we do. As I mentioned, the private property surveys, ABG is doing the conservation genomics and the ex situ safeguarding collections. Again, we do the long-term monitoring of the public lands with specific trees so we can see the effects of Hurricane Michael on this species. And then we also have seed trials going with seeds that are collected from the Atlanta Botanical Garden Nursery that we are replanting in specific spots on public lands and some private lands within its native range only. And then we're working also, my good friend Nicole Zampieri, who works for the Florida Natural Areas Inventory, she is also still in school and was working on habitat suitability models in her school, in her learning. And she came up with a really great habitat suitability model for Torreya taxifolia based on FNA's, the Florida Natural Areas Inventory, multiple variables that they have for that area. And so ABG has taken that habitat suitability model, which was very good at predicting where the current and the already extant populations of Torreya taxifolia are and were. And it was surprisingly spot on. It was really interesting to see that. And we're building upon that model in order to use that for, prioritizing areas for survey. And then ABG is also doing the fungicide trials on different fungicides for this specific, novel Fusarium species. And that's about it. I'm going to pass it right back to Valerie, but I do want to mention real quick in relation to invasive species in Torreya, if any of you want to see Torreya taxifolia, this very rare tree, I am going to organize some invasive plant work days. The one population that is above the state line into Georgia is just north of Chattahoochee, and it is being infested with coral ardesia and ligustrum species. It had like all the invasive ligustrums. And, there's also camphor there and everything is popping up there in Nandina as well. But I'm going to organize some work days to pull coral ardesia mostly in that area. We carried out like 60 pounds of just berries on the one day that I went up there. So it's, if anybody would like to join, I'll send that information to Emily and she'll send that out in the email as well. I'll pass it on to Val.
So just continuing our restoration and monitoring of rare plant communities. So we don't just, restore and then leave them. This is our Bill Frederick Park restoration site. It's a scrub restoration site. And that's Jackie Raleigh, who is our Oakland Nature Preserve liaison. And she helps us with most of our plant rescues. And I think at this time we're doing lupine monitoring. We also do habitat studies and seed collection. So if our restoration ethic is, we don't just restore, we don't just rescue if it's like a last resort. And so once we know that the property is actually going to be destroyed, like for example, like our Castle Hill site was once a Florida Forever project. However, for the many years that Florida Forever has been underfunded, the person who owned it was no longer a willing seller at some point, and so then it was going to be developed. So, since the property was not able to be protected, then we started with the rarest species. And then when we realized that they weren't going to develop immediately, we requested some updated timelines, and then we started doing seed collection. So you can get even more genetic diversity from seeds. So there was Ladies Nightcap on this particular property, and we work with partners such as Green Isle Gardens and obviously St. John's River Water Management District, Oakland Nature Preserve, to hold the plants. Lake Louisa State Park, we have a small nursery at Lake Louisa State Park, and they support our propagation and plant rescue efforts, as well as restoration sites at Lake Louisa, a number of different small restoration sites. Yeah, so here's just some more photos of us doing restoration, some Britain's beargrass there on the right. And I've already spoken about partnering with public land managers. And then our education is sort of my wheelhouse. So my job is to talk about all the good stuff we do. We have Marjorie Shropshire is our Palmetto editor. I help her with some, proofreading and stuff like that. I'm the editor of The Sable Miner, which is our bi-monthly newsletter. I started the weekly lunch and learns during the pandemic, and for some reason I haven't stopped. That's my favorite graphic I've made so far. And we have frequent social media posts. Lilly is the star of our social media channels, including our new TikTok, guys. Yeah. And then, of course, prior to the lunch and learns and the after hours, our main programming was the annual conference. And so we have had it for 2 years. The skills I got from doing these, the lunch and learns and stuff, I applied to doing virtual annual conference. So we canceled it 2020. I didn't know, nobody knew what to do. 2021, we did it virtual. And this year, out of an abundance of caution and not having executive director, bam, we're doing virtual annual conference, but it's going to be really good. We have a bunch of really great speakers, and it's $50. So please register and attend. And that's all I have.
And we're going to do some virtual field trips too.
Yes. Oh, and the Plant ID contest.
And that's actually everybody's favorite part, the annual conference. Any questions?
All right, yeah, thank you so much, y'all. That was fantastic. We do have a few minutes for questions, so feel free to either unmute or raise your hand or pop it in the chat box. It looks like we have a question from Barbara McAdam.
Yeah, hi guys. Oops, my camera's off. Just to say hi, I can take that off. We had our Dade Chapter Native Plant Society meeting last night. Yay. So it's double native. Where do you get those little bags that you're collecting the seeds in? I need more of these. You can send me an email later.
Okay, they're like organza bags from craft store.
Yeah, they're like what you put little wedding treats or something in. Yeah, all right, I'll figure it out. Thanks.
No, and Juliet bought all those in the past, so I don't know where she bought them.
I think if you just put in like Amazon or, if you go to a craft store, just look up organza jewelry bags. Usually that's
organza. That's the keyword. That's what I was missing. Thanks. Bye.
Great. And someone said you could get them from Michael's as well in the chat. So Lily, I had a quick question about the Torreya. The plants that either they get propagated at the botanical garden, are they all also just by default infected with the fusarium? Are there any plants that are not?
So we don't have a really easy, quick test yet to test for the fusarium, but it is assumed that all of the Torreya in all of the genetic tissue of Torreya everywhere pretty much is probably infected with this, because it started spreading as early as the 30s and 40s. Likely everything, unless somebody collected seeds or something before then and grew them somewhere else, they're anything that has been planted is likely infected. And it's become a real issue because a lot of people, when they hear about a rare endangered plant, they think, what can I do? And usually it's planting it, and they want to plant it in their yard. And there's a big move with a group called the Torreya Guardians, who have pushed to plant Torreya all up the East Coast in the Northeast. And right now they're just not believing us when we've told them about the issue with the fusarium. And it isn't quite, I mean, the work that the trials that UF has done to prove that it infects and kills other genera has not been published yet. So there's that, and hopefully that will be published, I think, like next month or very soon. And so maybe that will help convince them. But it does really scare me because, you know, losing all of our hemlocks, Pinus virginiana and Pinus pungens are very easily killed by this fusarium. That would be a real loss. So
where would they be getting the plant material to do a project like
well, nurseries can, for instance, Superior Trees in Madison, Florida, they have their own grove of Torreya that they grow out and sell. And then there have been issues with poaching as well with Torreya. And that's why I'm very, you know, we have to, when I have a volunteer come out to help me with these surveys, I have to have them sign a waiver that says they won't divulge any information. They have to sign a non-disclosure agreement as well. And you have to be really careful about sharing locations with them, unfortunately.
Wow, sure. Thank you. Yeah, so any other questions for Lily and Valerie? We will, you can always reach out to them or me, we can follow up. But again, I just want to, you know, thank them so much for joining us and reiterate how excited we are to kind of be rebuilding and reconnecting with this longstanding partner. And we have some exciting stuff coming up. I'm working with, oh gosh, the chapter name is escaping me right now, but one of the chapters to put together kind of a cool, hopefully fundraiser around Play Clean Go Awareness Week. So keep an eye out for that. I'll share more soon. But yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us, and look forward to working together more. Let's see, we did have a question pop up. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Lily? Okay.
Wendy is asking, does Torreya tolerate fire? And that's a great question. Torreya naturally occurs in these steephead ravines, which are typically very moist. They're constantly seeping. And so fire historically wouldn't often go down into the ravines, but it definitely occasionally did. And from what we found, especially since these trees are so small, they don't get a chance to become very mature. They're within, you know, the range of when a fire comes through, it can kill the top of the tree, and usually they resprout. Sometimes if they're big enough, they just are able to withstand the fire. Same thing with the Florida yew, which is also a very rare and endangered, well, not technically endangered, but it should be listed as endangered species that only occurs in these ravines as well. That's a Florida endemic. I've seen it withstand fire also. So that's a great question.
That is a great question. Another question, it looks like, what are some of the other primary invasive species of concern related to Torreya? So I think you mentioned coral ardesia and tallow and camphor. Any others?
Yeah, I would say one of the things that I'm really seeing pop up along the Apalachicola and spreading into these ravines is Perilla fructescens, which I don't think is listed yet, but it should be. I've seen big, mass, thick colonies of Perilla. It's either a perennial or a biennial, and it produces copious amounts of seed and just spreads aggressively. We also have issues with the Tradescantia. It's the flamenthus, I think, you know, the common one that is really aggressive. But mostly, and of course, ligustrum. Ligustrum sinensis is probably the worst. The Chinese ligustrum, that one is very aggressive in these ravines. It reseeds so aggressively, and it creates these thickets that shade everything else out and form monocultures. So yeah, pretty much ligustrum, you know, camphor, but we even see that parasol tree. I can't remember the genus and species for that, and Chinaberry also in these areas.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so switching gears, we are going to shift over to some of our FISP and CISMA updates. And if I can get my screen up here. So real quick, I know you guys have been inundated with more of my emails this month than usual. And a lot of that has to do with the ongoing Florida Weed Wrangle Month, as well as the upcoming NESAW. So just a reminder that we are currently running the at-home weed wrangle. So we've been doing kind of social media blasts about that. Please continue to share. Folks have until February 28th to submit entries, and it's so simple. Literally one plant or more, take a picture and you're in. So it's very easy. I'm going to get some links up in the chat box real quick while I get these up so that you can follow along. I wonder if it'll let me post them all at one time.
And I want to say thank you to all of you who are working so hard on invasive species management in the state of Florida. It's critical to the conservation of our native species, as you all well know.
So there's that information. Again, and in the chat box as well, these links, I've got our social media links there. Please just kind of give us a last push on this. Hopefully get some people out this weekend pulling some stuff in the yards. Shout out to the Native Plant Society who donated 3 individual year-long memberships this year for as prizes. So excited about that. And also some awesome books by Jenny Stiebolt and some garden gloves from our partner Weed Wrangle. We have some really great stuff popping up for the first week of March. So National Invasive Species Awareness Week, which is hosted by NASMA, is occurring February 28th through, we're extending it to March 5th because we have a lot of weed wrangles on March 5th. So you can see here some events we've got across the state going on through CISMA and other partners. And then also I wanted to flag the NESAW webinars. So there's some good information that'll be shared there as well, coming from kind of the national level. So I have links here in the chat box for the FISP, both this map you can visit online, as well as our FISP calendar events, where all of the details for all the CISMA events is located. And then the NASMA site that I have there is not the NESAW site. You can visit nesaw.org, but this is the events site, and it's probably the easiest way to register for these NESAW webinars. And I wanted to include that as well because on our upcoming events, I wanted to flag that NASMA is again hosting the EdMap Summit this year. And so I think last year was the first one, but that's going to be on March 23rd. And that is on the same link, that NASMA events link to register for that. And also on March 16th, they're hosting UF's Dr. Steve Johnson to talk about tegus. And so if you're interested in that issue and that's where they're popping up in crazy places, you can join there as well. So you can see here, and again, if you get my emails, this is that list of events. I believe I don't have that link, so I'll pop the link to join that. If you're not getting my emails, I'll pop the link to join that listserv in the chat box in a moment. I also wanted to flag that oh my gosh, sorry about that. On November 7th through 10th, the NASMA annual conference in person is being scheduled or is being planned for Fort Myers, Florida. So they're coming to us this year. This is a great opportunity to highlight work being done in Florida and invasive species issues. It's being co-hosted by the Florida Invasive Species Council. So we're actively working with them to coordinate this. And the call for abstracts is now open. So please, if you have any kind of work you may want to present with this, go ahead and get that in. We're really hoping to kind of have, like I said, a strong Florida contingent representing. And I know that our national partners are really excited to be coming to Florida and kind of learn firsthand the issues that we're dealing with. Also, just real quickly, wanted to flag that the 2022 Innovations in Invasive Species Management Conference has been scheduled for December 13th and 16th. And if you're not familiar with this conference, this is something that Chuck Bargeron, our UGA partner, partners with a group out of Tennessee, the Invasive Plant Control Group, to put on each year. So this one is actually in Nashville, but always looks like a really good program. So I wanted to flag that date just got set as well. Lastly, just our call schedule, just a reminder, next month, another partner highlight. I'm excited about this one as well. Florida DOT, what they're doing with invasive species, wildflowers, and landscaping. DOT is another longstanding FIS partner that's been active and engaged, for a decade or more. In May, we've got the plant list and plant listing with Dr. Lawrence. So I believe last year she presented on the work to get both Japanese honeysuckle and beach vitex listed and added to the Florida noxious weed list. So lots of good information and updates coming from Dia. Flatworms in June, and Dia will be back with us in September to talk about her horizon scanning projects. So how do we prevent the next invasions? I do have some dates for 2022 to fill. So if you either A, have a project you'd like to present, or B, have a topic you'd like to hear on, I would love that feedback. So just shoot me an email. And I think that is it for today. Just a reminder, all past calls are available online, and that link is in the chat box as well. And this call will go up either sometime later today or by tomorrow. Jessica Spencer popped in the chat box to let us know that the U.S. Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants kicked off a new podcast today. So check that out. That does look good. I can't wait to listen. And you can go to their social medias to find the access for that. So we are a little early. I won't close it right away if anyone has questions or discussion. Otherwise, thank you everybody for joining us today. It's always great to get together monthly and chat with everybody. So thank you. And again, thanks to our fantastic presenters, Valerie and Lilly.